And today we have a really wonderful, distinguished panel to talk about this really, really important topic. Do forgive me while I read off my notes so I do not mess up anyone's title. So starting all the way on my left, we have Marcy Hamilton, who's the founder and CEO of Child USA. We have Catherine Robb, the executive director of Child US Advocacy, and we have Peter Isley, co-founder of Ending Clergy Abuse and Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. So I want to jump right in, and I'm hoping each of you can give our audience a little context about how you came to this work. And Peter, I'm going to start with you.
You promised the other direction. God, the Atlantic. Well, I'm here because I'm a survivor of sexual assault as a child. This is about ending the crisis of sexual abuse. The crisis of sexual abuse is happening right now, today. And it creates something. It creates survivors. Each one of us, and I work with 4 generations of survivors in the Catholic Church, 4 generations. The youngest I know right now is 7, and the oldest is 95, and her son's a priest. So I'm here because of what happened to me, the event that occurred to me. That's why I'm here.
I too am a survivor, and I'm a survivor of sexual abuse by a family member, which, as many of you in any social service area may understand, is a big population of those survivors of sexual abuse. My abuse started when I was about 8 years old and ended when I was about 14. I am here. I am here because I have a big idea. And my big idea is let's end child sexual abuse, and let's give survivors like myself and Peter and many others that we know all over the country and the world, let's give them access to justice, and let's identify hidden sexual predators out there and make institutions that cover up those horrific acts by sexual predators and sometimes move them around. Let's hold them accountable. So that's my big idea.
So I came to this in a circuitous route, to put it mildly. I had a major case at the United States Supreme Court that I wasn't supposed to win, which I did. I persuaded the court in Bernie v. Flores that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was unconstitutional. I found myself on the opposite side of every religious group in the United States, including my own, the Presbyterians. And I started being approached by all the people who work against religious groups that harm people. And they all involved children. And I just really couldn't believe that religious groups were harming others to the extent that they were. I started looking into it. I was a law professor at the time. I'm now a professor at Penn. But as a law professor, I ended up writing a book, God versus the Gavel, to just basically say, there's a lot of harm being done by religious groups, and some of it is sexual abuse. And then I had, I guess it's a big idea, I had an epiphany. I had been brought in as the church state scholar in all of the early California child sex abuse cases. And I kept saying to the lawyers, why are there no lawsuits for most of these victims? And they kept saying the statute of limitations. And I said, well, why would a deadline be the reason you can't get justice for this horrific crime? It just doesn't make any sense. So I wrote a book. You know, what do academics do? So I wrote Justice Denied, and I wrote it for the purpose of making it clear to the whole world that victims of sex abuse don't get justice. And if they were to get justice, we could identify the hidden predators. We could shift the cost of the abuse. We could make organizations accountable. I thought it was a no-brainer. So my idea was that I would write this book on statute of limitations for the general public, and then I would go back to doing fancy First Amendment work, right? And I'd only talk to people like Cass Sunstein, right? That was my theory. First Things, which is a conservative Catholic publication, published a review. And they called the review Marcy World. And they came after me. And I knew that first of all, this wasn't a no-brainer, that there were going to be people against this, which I thought was outrageous. But I also learned that there is a universe out there of suffering victims, and the world didn't care. And I've been working on it ever since. So for just about, since the 2002 Spotlight report that came out of the Boston Globe, I've been working on these issues almost exclusively. I went to Penn to start Child USA, which is a nonprofit think tank to end child abuse and neglect.
Yeah.
So
I think that people, comparatively, are aware of issues that exist in certain areas. Issues that exist with priests, for instance. People feel familiar with that idea. They feel familiar with the idea that priests in the church have been abusing children, but at some point, they were not. I think one of the reasons that we are here to have this conversation is because of late, there has been a seeming wave of uncovering systemic and continued decades-long abuse of children in a bunch of different places. You think about the US Gymnastics issues. You think about a bunch of other places. Why do you guys think that people have been so surprised by this, given what you know? Marcy, you just said there's an entire universe of children who are being abused. Why do you think people are so surprised, and why do you think this particular moment is ripe for this conversation, and people have really kind of grabbed hold of these stories?
Well, there really is, there's a pandemic internationally of child sex abuse because we don't protect children. We think we love children. We think we protect children, but we really protect adults. We instinctively protect adults, always. A man's livelihood is always more important, right? One false claim is more upsetting than 1,000 silent victims, right? And so there's a lot of denial in the culture, but I also think there's a lot of ignorance. And if I could just show my first slide.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things people need to understand is that it's not just the church. Since 2002, there has been one scandal after another in religious settings, in schools, in universities, medical professionals. The newest wave is medical professionals. Doctors with thousands of victims. Sports, and then the one at the bottom, which is the last frontier, which we don't talk enough about, is the family, which is about 30%. So this is the universe. So everywhere you go, children are present. Some are being sexually abused. And so part of it is we just haven't yet educated the public, and especially parents. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are going to be sexually abused by the time they're 18. And predators are the guy you love, the guy you trust, the guy that got your family to trust him. It's not stranger danger, right? It's not someone that you look at and go, oh, I'd never let my kid near that guy. It's the coach that you want to make your kid a gymnast. It's the coach you want to get your kid to the soccer. So.
Yeah, and if I could add, I'm sure Peter and Marcy would agree that the work that we're involved in, it's really a civil rights movement for children. You hear, all the different movements that are going on all over the country, all over the world, whether it's, climate change, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, all of that. And they're all legitimately and, very important. But kids can't speak up. And just, I could just share that, from my personal experience, I wasn't able to really share it until I was well into adulthood. And to share it publicly, I was in my 40s. And, the average age right now is about 52 when survivors first disclose their abuse. So it's this enormous secret. And I think the other thing is that, it's ugly. It's dirty. It's uncomfortable. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to see it. So I think that contributes to the secret. It's like the best known secret, and it's just insidious in our culture. And I think because it's a secret, because children, when they are raped and sexually assaulted, keep this secret for a long time, or ashamed, or afraid, it crosses so many boundaries, whether it's a family boundary or a religious boundary or between a coach and a player, whatever it may be. It just creates this, this deep sense of fear and shame and secrecy. So I think that has always kept it under the rug, by and large. And I think that's what's happening is people are just starting to talk about it more. And I think in large part, the Me Too movement did help with that. But, honestly, I think it's the voice of some incredibly brave survivors that come forward and speak their, very painful and ugly truth. So I think it's the secret and the shame, and that the culture doesn't want to talk about it, has kept it that way.
Peter, and then I want to also come back to you, Catherine, on this.
Sure.
What has it been like over the past few years to watch the conversation like this grow and to see kind of more survivors coming out and being public with their stories? For two people who approach this both from a professional place but also from a personal place.
Well, I've been at this over 25 years. And I bring with me, I've just been in Argentina for a week and a half with the survivors there. That's Pope Francis's home country. It's an unbelievably corrupt hierarchy in that country. What those survivors and victims are enduring there is unimaginable to most of us. Their major case now is of a predator, and they're finally going to trial. There's 6 of them. What it took to get it there. Not with the help of Pope Francis, by the way, who knew about it. Deaf students, deaf children. A religious order where the 3 or 4 of them that founded it were for deaf children. And I come from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where there was a school for deaf children in which Father Lawrence Murphy, the founder of that school, or the man who ran that school, sexually assaulted over 200 deaf children. And the Archdiocese knew about it. Archbishop Weekland, who was the most liberal archbishop in the United States, knew about it, covered it up. Cardinal Ratzinger knew about it at the CDF, left him in the priesthood. When you talk about this message, the predator is always of more social value than the child, period. That message as a child gets drilled into you because most children know when you come forward what you're up against. And you're not going to be backed for the most part. There's very, very, very good reasons why survivors don't come forward. It takes a real special kind of stupid for clergy survivors to take on the Catholic Church. And we talk about this cause. It's a global cause now, and I think with the Catholic Church is so unique. And I think, I've been at this 25 years. I've seen this come in big waves and go away, disappear into amnesia, and then come back again because it's not resolved. That's the nature of trauma. It's compulsive repetition of trauma. I think it was Plato, maybe it was Buddha, and here it said that there's 3 great passions, human passions. Passion for love, passion for hate, and the passion for ignorance. And ignorance is by far the greatest human passion. I don't know if that made any sense whatsoever. I don't have slides, Hamilton.
Catherine, I'm wondering what you have been thinking kind of over these past few years as this has bubbled up to the surface.
I've been thinking that that there's hope, that the bravery of so many coming forward, the work of both of my co-panel members here are engaged in educating the public, educating people. I think that there's there's hope because people are speaking. And I think for a long time, people just didn't speak about it. It wasn't something people felt comfortable about. I think there's a lot of hope. I do have a steady level of frustration with legislative bodies because mostly what I do right now at Child US Advocacy is I work trying to pass laws in basically every state in the country to make kids safer. And unfortunately, there's a lack of leadership and a lot of ignorance, as Peter just talked about. There's a lot of ignorance about the nature of trauma, why victims don't disclose, and the idiocy of statute of limitations, their arbitrary unfairness. So that's a bit of a frustration, just trying to educate legislative leaders and governors across the state. Marcy and I worked very closely with Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York. It took us 12 years.
16.
Yes, so a long time to try to convince that legislative body, get the support of the governor, and get a piece of common sense legislation that protects children passed. Why it took that long, I will never understand, but it certainly won't stop my fight and my efforts in other states.
Marcy and Catherine, I actually would love to drill down a little bit into the legalities of this and the laws that you guys work on and fight for, because I think the thing that has come up several times, and I think the thing that is absolutely right, is that when people think about the classes of citizens who are protected, they would lump children into the most protected.
Right.
And I think that is a broad assumption, and if not true, kind of a big kind of layer of ignorance that prevents more work being done here. So can you guys talk a little bit more about where you see legal gaps and how you are trying to fix them?
Sure. So at Child USA, we are putting together the social science and marrying it with the best legal analysis to figure out what the best policies are. And what I found is the only way to move children's issues is with fact. It's not enough to go in and say, we all love children. You have to go in with facts that rebut the ignorance. But what we found out is that the victims of child sex abuse almost always are shut out of the legal system. And this is something that we've known now for about 20 years. So we've been working on opening the door to justice as the first line of getting more information and helping more of the victims. So this is the reality. This is the science. These are the facts. The average age of coming forward from child sex abuse is 52. A third never come forward. Only a third come forward as children. And so, the vast majority of your victims are, it's not just silent, but when they finally are ready to talk, when they're in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, they go sit down with a lawyer, and the lawyer says, sorry, you're out of luck. You're too late. It's your fault that you can't get justice. And so we've got two sets of victims in the United States. We have the victims from the past who have been shut out of the system. We have the victims right now that are increasingly getting more opportunities as we change the laws of statute of limitations. So since 2002, the Spotlight story I mark in history is really the start of talking about the institution-based abuse. It's the first time we knew that bishops were covering it up. We knew that priests were abusing kids. We didn't know the whole system was making it happen. And so what you see is that starting in 2002, there were two states that made some changes in the civil or the criminal statute of limitations. By the time you get to 2019, this year is a banner year. We have 39 states considering statute of limitations reform. We have 18 states that have already passed it. Last year, we only had 15 states consider it. Mm-hmm. So we are now on hyperdrive, and I think it's because of the lawsuits that are educating the public, which are motivating the attorneys general, which are then investigating, which are then motivating more lawsuits, and lawmakers are starting to do the right thing. So we rank the states as to the quality of their statute of limitations, and when you combine both civil and criminal, at this point, Ohio is by far the worst. Delaware is the best. Delaware has completely eliminated its civil and its criminal statute of limitations going forward, and they had a 2-year window for the victims from the past, 07 to 09, which said, if your SOL expired, that's okay. You can go to court. Now, what happened with the window between 2007 and 2009 is we learned about one of those doctors, Dr. Earl Bradley. Dr. Earl Bradley had roughly 1,000 victims come forward. The only reason we learned about Earl Bradley is we created the opportunity for justice for the victims. It's the access to justice. It's not the end game, it's the forward game. The big question is how many states are going to help the victims from the past, right? Every state at this point is seriously considering helping the victims from now to the future. 40 states have already eliminated the criminal statute of limitations, actually 44. These are the states that have revived the expired statutes of limitations. These are the states that have spoken for the victims from the past. And Vermont is in the lead at this point in terms of quality. They actually passed a bill this year that said, it doesn't matter what your statute of limitation is. Backwards, forwards, we don't care. It's never a defense in the future for every victim. Michigan's the worst because Michigan passed a window just for Larry Nassar. Last year it was open for 90 days, and it was only applicable against a medical professional who was incarcerated. Well, the only one that fit the 90 days was that. We're now rolling out this concept of subjective windows like that. But New Jersey and New York, both of them are opening major windows this year. We are going to learn about hundreds of predators that we didn't know about yet. So let me just add 2 other legal reforms that I think are absolutely critical. We have to change the defamation laws. If a victim names their perpetrator in public and they are sued for defamation by the perpetrator, when they prove up their case, the perpetrator should have to pay them damages, treble damages for the harm they did to them. In other words, you can't be Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby sued his victims for defamation, right? A lot of priests have sued for defamation in states where the statute of limitations wasn't open, you couldn't prove up your case. We need to fix the defamation laws to level the playing field between the predators and the victims. But I think the single most important thing that we need to do is to change our insurance laws. We need to co-opt, we were just at the Allstate CEO's presentation, we need to co-opt the insurance companies by law into doing youth-serving organizations child protection audits every single year. And if you're a youth-serving organization and you can't pass your child protection audit, you don't get insurance. And if you don't get insurance, you go out of business. And here's what I have to say to the organizations that are upset they might go out of business because they don't have the right policies. I don't care. I hope you go out of business. Until we only wear seatbelts because of the insurance industry. We need the insurance industry to step up and start to be the front line and reduce the risk. But I can tell you right now, they're our primary opponent in every state for statute of limitations. So we need insurance to switch from being on the defensive to being on the offensive on this. And we're in conversations. I think we'll get there. So, sorry.
Catherine, I'm wondering if you agree with kind of that assessment of the 3 tiers of kind of legal approaches.
I do, and I would just add that I think there's a great need to really go after legislative bodies, especially leadership on all states, and to hold them accountable. I know both Peter and Marcy have seen this repeatedly, that many really effective pieces of legislation that would open the door of justice to survivors and then therefore expose hidden sexual predators. Many of those are stopped in committee in leadership, and they're stopped because, generally speaking, it's the Catholic Church or some other religious institutions, Boy Scouts of America, insurance lobby, that put the pressure on leadership just to hold their finger on that bill, and the bill doesn't move and it never goes to a vote. So I think that we really need to call out those leaders. And I think, just this morning in the Boston Globe, I was quoted, because we're working on Rhode Island and they have a Rhode Island Metro piece. And, I basically said in a press conference last week that no legislative body should ever be a co-conspirator to a cover-up of child rape. And that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening, that legislative bodies with their leadership are not being held accountable and are therefore, in a co-conspirator type of relationship with large institutions that are trying to protect their deep pockets. And obviously we need to protect children before we protect the pockets of institutions that look the other way.
Well, and Rhode Island is the most Catholic state in the country. So I give Catherine a lot of credit for going into Rhode Island. I'm very glad I have an advocacy organization that's part of us now, because they're nuts. They are not going to walk away with anything for the victims that's going to hurt the church, because the church is doing all the right stuff.
Peter, I'm wondering, I think we're at a point where a lot of people hear about a new scandal or accusation in the church on a fairly regular basis, and they think things have changed. They think there is an apparatus for wheedling out these priests who are abusive. And I'm just wondering if you think things have changed significantly within the church and the way they deal with sexual predators.
Does anybody here think that? I got it.
No.
Well, I think
There's no one at the Aspen Ideas. No way.
I think there is a sense among people that something
Yeah.
must have changed or gotten better if we're even hearing about things, because the huge thing was the break in the first place. The idea that this is happening and somebody somewhere is talking publicly about it. Now, it's not hyper irregular to hear the church having to confront or deal with it, or to hear about accusations, or to have a conversation, to the point where, for some people, Catholic priest and children has become the punchline of a joke.
No, and that's the thing, that's what's happened. A pedophile priest, that alliteration is now around the world, literally around the world. I've never been anywhere around the world, talked to anybody, whoever they are, that has not heard of pedophile priests. I think part of and they deserve to have that, because they have not, they're an occupation. And in civil society, you're an occupation, and you have broken the public trust, and you've used your occupation to sexually assault and rape children. And you have not ejected those people from your occupation, and you have not notified the public of what they've done. That paints the entire group, and it should, because priests have not ejected priests who are offenders from their occupation. It's astonishing to think. Whenever I meet a cardinal or bishop, have that opportunity, which I've had many times. Not the Pope yet. You should have met us at the summit. We were there at the Global Summit. And that was an astonishing moment for survivors. Everything happens in this issue for us because of survivors. It's not going to happen without survivors. Everything that we're going to talk about here is simply never going to happen without survivors. And what do we need? What has got to get to us, to those of us, so many survivors around the world that are fighting on this front line? Because without our story, without our voice, without the moral imperative of justice that comes through the story of the survivor, you're talking about hope. I mean, I'm sure you agree with me. You need something a hell of a lot goddamn better than hope to stay at this. One of the things we've done that's been so cost-effective around this for years, and it didn't start with Boston, and the cover-up was known well before Boston. Well, 1992 was a huge year around the country for these cases. It's just, we always enter it, I'm just saying with my issue, including survivors, it starts wherever you enter the issue, wherever you become aware of it. Now it's Pennsylvania, which is great. That was an enormous tipping point, an amazing historic tipping point. We're not going to be able to go back from that point, okay? All the effort then is to put it back. That's what institutions do, to put it back, because this is so disruptive. And we have to disrupt these systems. How do we disrupt these systems? Right now, the only mortal sin probably left in the world is the interruption of the flow of capital. That's why, and the interruption of that flow within the Catholic Church, in those civil cases, that's what's done it. That is what's done it. You're not going to get anywhere until you interrupt the flow of capital within the Catholic Church. But I just want to say something about hope. And there's just something better than hope. One of the things that we've done for years is that and we're doing it around the world now. We've trained survivors to do this around the world. When there's a priest or a cleric that's been identified as a child molester in a parish, and he's been in your parish, and the church is not going to tell you about him. Now they're somewhat doing it in the United States. We'll talk about those lists someday about, we don't have time about they're releasing the name dumps they're doing right now, and how false they are. Those lists are not complete by any means. To say something, I'm now going to be transparent and tell you the truth, and I'm hiding half of it from you, and then it gets discovered. Let me go back to hope. I'm going to take a second here about hope. So we go to these parishes, right? We flyer those parishes. We call the press because you're going to reach. That's the whole point. Someone's going to see that number that you've got out there. Someone's going to see your web address. Some victim's going to see it out there. And, so we'll go and we'll flyer, after Mass, right? It's a very interesting experience doing that. I'm not a flyer-er by nature, okay? But you talk to people, you talk to Catholics, right? And one of the things I've repeatedly heard over the years is that a Catholic will say to me, "This has not made me lose my faith." And I'll say to them, and they're very proud of this, and I'll say to them, "It's great you succeeded where Christ failed, because Christ lost his faith." In fact, I would argue, as a Christian atheist, as I would try to designate myself, that the loss of faith is your entry into Christianity. St. Paul talks about three great things. Faith. And talk about St. Paul. Talk about a militant organizer of a universal egalitarian cause. Okay, what I would give for a St. Paul. Okay, well, we'd all give for that. But he said faith is great. It's a great thing. But it's not the most important thing. And he said hope is a great thing. But it's not the most important thing. I don't know if you know your scripture. Love. Christ never lost his love. He lost his faith, and he lost his hope. And that's what happened to me and so many survivors. How do you communicate that to a religion and an institution that is a religion of love? How do you communicate that? And when that moment for every survivor, when you speak, that is a resurrection. That is the resurrection to me. When you say what has never been said before, and when a survivor speaks, when they tell their, quote, story, it is a resurrection of the voice. And it is a creation every time of the possibility for justice. It brings the possibility of justice into the world. Where we put that testimony, that is what counts. as survivors, in hearings, in courtrooms, in parishes, or on the street, because that testimony, that witness, opens up the possibility for change. And justice is like love. It's something that seizes us. It's something that happens to us. It's something that we don't prepare for. It's something that we often don't want. But it changes us, just like love. It turns us upside down. There's no guarantee for where it will go. Its path is always uncertain. But we become then a subject of justice. And that's what I think we want to invite everyone to be, to join us to become a subject of this uncertain, tentative, vulnerable thing called justice, and that we create the truth of justice together, because justice is always new whenever it happens. It's always something that has never happened before.
So I want to let the audience know that we're going to save some time at the end for your questions. I have another question or two for our panel, but if you could start thinking about your questions now, condensing them down so we can get as many in as humanly possible. So we've talked a lot about kind of the back end of after abuse happens, or after it seems clear, or there seems to be an indication that somebody is a consistent and prolific predator. I want to talk a little bit about what can be done both on an individual basis, but also on a systemic and formal basis to prevent that. I think insurance was kind of a great example of that, quite frankly, as someone who's covered the insurance industry, I've never even heard of or thought of. So I'm wondering if we can touch a little bit on what the preventative measures are here.
Well, we have established what's called the Game Over Commission, which is 16 of the leading experts in the country to study how the Nassar scandal happened. How is it possible that every institution around those children let those children down? Their parents, MSU, USAG, USOC, the medical profession, how is that possible? So I think that we need to study these issues. We need to figure out how to prevent it. And what we're doing is we will be holding public hearings this year and next year. We'll be writing a white paper. We have the leading forensic psychiatrists, leading forensic psychologists, the top people in the country. We have to ask the question. We don't know yet, frankly, how to prevent it. Now, there are a few touchstones that work, but we still don't have all the answers. One is that you need to understand that a child is much more likely to recant than they are to tell. And so if a kid comes in the house and says, you know, Uncle Joe, I really don't like what he does, the wrong answer is, what are you talking about? He's the funniest guy in the family, right? The answer is, really, what? And you sit down and you listen to the kid. And kids are learning earlier than they've ever been how to say something about it. But there's another really simple rule that if we can succeed in establishing, it's going to make a humongous difference, and that is the 2 deep rule. No adult alone with a child. Sex abuse happens in the coach's car when they're alone. It often happens in the confessional. Rape of adult women happens in the confessional. Sexual abuse happens when the tutor comes to the house alone after school. Sexual abuse needs secrecy. And so one of the movements we're working on with the American Academy of Pediatrics, with the insurance folks and others, is how do you set up rules and procedures everywhere where there always have to be open doors, no closed doors, and there always has to be another adult of some variety in the picture. So the pediatrician does not get to be alone with your child. That's how Earl Bradley got 1,000 victims. He had a wonderful waiting room for the parents. It was fantastic. You could be on the computer, you could play pinball if you were one of the dads. It was great. And then he sexually abused every kid that went into the room because they were alone. So one of the things we don't understand is the radical vulnerability of children. It is radical. They can't protect themselves. They can't. They're not experienced enough. They're not young enough. They don't know enough. They're not strong enough. And so, so we have a lot to do, but we have a lot to study. And I don't think we should jump at answers until we know more, frankly.
If I could just address that. I've been asked that question so many times. I'm also on the board at Massachusetts Citizens for Children, and the executive director there is just an amazing woman and they've created an e-learning mostly for schools and youth-serving organizations, and I think we're maybe going to offer it to parents as well. But anyway, when I'm asked that question, I always go back to that little girl, and I think of myself, little pixie haircut, sneakers, I was a bit of a tomboy. And I go back to her, and I think to myself, what did the adults in my life need to know so they could have identified that I was being harmed, terribly harmed repeatedly? And so I go to that, just the signs of trauma, the signs of abuse, whether it's I couldn't sleep at night. Most of my abuse occurred at night, so I was having terrible trouble sleeping. I became very much an introvert. I dressed like a boy because I felt like if I was a boy, I wasn't going to be attractive, and all the little things that I did that now through years of therapy I understand. I think if teachers, my coaches, my parents were able to see that. So I guess my point is, I go back to that little girl and I think to myself, if the adults in my life had better tools and were educated about the signs of sexual abuse, I probably would not have suffered as much as I did. So I think education is a piece.
Yep.
Peter, did you have anything to add?
Well, information and education, we're all the work that people are doing to change things. The limits of information and education. There's a joke, I'm also a psychotherapist. There's a joke, a little off color, that sort of gets to this point. There's a man who has a bar, owns a bar, his friend's there, and he comes out one night and he's urinating against the side of the bar. Comes back the next night, he's doing the same thing. And so he says to him, well, what are you doing? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, well, I'm going to send you to therapy. I'll pay for it. So he goes to therapy. He's paying the bills. 6 months later, he comes back. There he is again, urinating on the side of the bar. And he said, I've been paying your therapy bills. And the guy says, yeah, now I know why I do it. There's something about, and I'm not against information and education, but why doesn't that move and change things so often?
It is moving and changing things.
Yeah, I'm never going to disagree with you, Mercy. You were before the Supreme Court. I'm going to lose. But what I'm trying to get at poorly here is there's when you're interrupting the unconscious of a system, that it's a matter of not just power, but of enjoyment, this satisfaction and enjoyment. I mean, the thing that's so amazing about the Catholic Church as just an example of a system, what I say to a bishop, I've been in this before, I'll ask him one question, maybe he gets at this. I'll say, if you can answer this question for me, I will be at the front pew of the cathedral for Mass every day. And I mean it, I'll be there. If you can answer me this question. You can't be a woman and a priest. I'll accept that for the moment. You can't be a married man and a priest. I'll accept that for a moment. But literally around the world, under their law and practice, you can be a child molester and a priest. I had a great philosophy professor at Harvard, Nelson Goodman. He would say, take a proposition and then create a world in which that sentence is true. Take that sentence and create a world, and there you have, I think, this occupation of the priesthood. And it's not just the priesthood, but it's getting at the unconscious of a system. It's disrupting the unconscious of the system. That's what's so difficult. It's not changing conscious rules and laws and thoughts, but changing unconscious thoughts that generate the system. Because within at least the Catholic Church, but I think in all these systems, it's producing this. It keeps recreating the space for this to happen. What makes that space? What is the attachment? What is the libidinal attachment to this obscene underside of this institution, which they cannot let go of or let let go of control of, and to open it up as to what is going on. And that's going to change that institution. It's going to change everybody in that institution, and it's not going to challenge them in a superficial way. It goes to, in all of us, in families, it goes to the heart of everything that we believe in, everything that we have faith in, things that we don't even know that we believe in those things. It's going to mean the fall of so much. The big other, I think you'd call it the other, whether it's God, whether it's education, knowledge, it's going to mean the fall of that. But that's what's going to bring us an opening to freedom, I think, to create something different, because what we need doesn't exist yet. We have to speak it, we have to bring it into existence. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not quite sure at all what that is. But so, just to say, I'm not against information and education, Marcy.
I want to make sure that if we have any questions in the audience, we get to them. I think we're going to start way back there and make our way around.
Hi, thanks. I'm a freelance reporter. First, I want to thank Jillian for dealing with my persnicketyness on my current contract with the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's another tent where that discussion's going.
On another story I'm working on, so I have two related questions. The numbers show that recidivism for people who are convicted of child sexual abuse is much lower than for other crimes. I'm wondering if this is because, or believed to be because of low reporting, low catching these guys after they do it. And related to that, how big a problem is it, in your view, and I'm trying to get these stats from the U.S. Marshal's Office, of people who are charged, skip bail, and never show up for court again, and then, possibly reoffend?
Marcy, do you want to take that?
Does it frequently happen, as far as you know, that people get low bail? The story I'm working on concerns a guy that his parents paid $750. He got out of jail. He fled to Mexico, and I'm wondering if that's a widespread situation.
Well, I think also we're going to probably take the recidivism one, but if you want to connect with Marcy or Catherine later to ask more specific questions for your story, we can do that.
I mean, it's very common that prosecutors plead down and then often don't pursue people who don't have serious claims, and they haven't put all the pieces together, so they don't really get it. It's beyond a reasonable doubt as the standard. The vast majority of child sex abuse never gets prosecuted, even when they believe the child, because the children are difficult witnesses. And there's typically not a witness unless you have some kind of trauma sign. So the criminal justice system can't take care of this problem. The civil justice system is taking care of the problem. And it's the only way that's going to make any of these institutions change.
I think that the point, though, is that you're making, it's very difficult to get really reliable, data and information on this population of offenders, who they are, where they are, what's going on with them. Part of that is because of the reporting rate. The reporting rate of child sexual abuse, I think in the United States, is about 7 or 9%. An offender knows they got a 20 in 1 chance of getting away with it. They're fully aware of this. But so most offenders are not identified. We don't know who they are. And what we look at, what we've researched, are people in the prison or the justice system. I will say in a positive sense, though, I think we can somewhat with some qualification say this. When an offender, when there is both treatment and a criminal justice intervention, that I think gives us the best reliable outcomes. If you do one and not the other, the Catholic Church tried to do just the one. They sent them to their own treatment centers and they laundered them around, but there was no criminal justice intervention. And so you have to do both those things. I think that's the best possibility we have for at least stopping an offender from doing this again.
Yeah.
Well, we actually know, we know that if you get a youth offender and you get them the right training, which we know what it is, they'll stop.
Okay.
They
I know
won't do it again.
we had a bunch more questions, but we do have to seed the room. I don't want to curb anyone's questions or discourse, so if our panelists can stay for a few minutes, but outside, we can try and get to some more questions.
Sure.
Thank you all so much for being here, and please join me in thanking our panel.